Good morning and welcome everyone to White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church. We are a congregation in the free faith tradition, a community of youth, adults, and children dedicated to pluralism in the spiritual search and ethics grounded in action. We are grateful to share this space with you today. Service participants this morning include Amy Peterson-Derrick and Jack Gady, Reverend Jack Gady, supported by Anna Garris and Aaron Scott. Today, after the service at 11:15, we hope that you'll join us for social hour, and you'll hear more about what that is at the end of the service. We'll put the Zoom link in and easy instructions into the chat box. Welcome to our church. Together, we grow our souls and serve the world.
Come in. Come into this space which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, fears and anxieties, loves and hopes. For here you need not hide nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you are called to be. Come into this space where we can heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this space where the ordinary is sanctified, the human is celebrated, the compassionate is expected. Come into this space. Together we make it a holy space, and welcome. Today, Ken Stewart will be lighting our chalice.
What stories will be told for future generations of what's happening in our country these days? How it all got ignited. Watching the murder of George Floyd live on television. So many other murders before him. What stories will we tell for future generations of lessons that we've learned today? Light the chalice for future stories.
Please join in our opening words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And now please sing this hymn, All This Joy.
All this joy, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is life, such is being, such is spirit, such is love, city of joy, city of sorrow, city of promise, city of pain, such is life, such is being, such is spirit, such is love. World of joy, world of sorrow, world of promise, world of pain, such is life, such is being, such is spirit, such is love. All this joy, all this sorrow, all this
Good morning. Take a breath. As Unitarian Universalists, we draw wisdom from many different sources. This morning's story is by Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel from his novel, The Gates of the Forest. When the Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov saw a misfortune threatening the Jews, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There, he would light the fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and misfortune averted. Years later, when a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, "Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I am still able to say the prayer. This must be sufficient." It was sufficient, and again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, another rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Leib Sazov, in order to save his people once more, would go into the forest and say, "I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient. And again, the miracle was accomplished. The years passed, and it fell to Rabbi Yisrael Eruzhin to overcome misfortune. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. "I am unable to light the fire. I do not know the words to the prayer, and I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient.
Join me in a time of prayer and meditation. Breathe deep. Find the center. Locate your body in space. Our fragile, tender bodies, strong with grit, strong with emotions. Bring this deep knowledge into our lives. We are whole and holy. We are wholly loved. Remember that our ordinary lives are extraordinary and sacred. Listen to these words by Lynn Unger. The universe does not revolve around you. The stars and planets spinning through the ballroom of space dance with one another quite outside of your small life. You cannot hold gravity or seasons. Even air and water inevitably evade your grasp. Why not then let go? You could move through time like a shark through water, neither restless nor ceasing, absorbed in and absorbing that native element. Why pretend you can do otherwise? The world comes in at every pore, mixes in your blood before breath releases you into the world again. Did you think the fragile boundary of your skin could build a wall? Listen, every molecule is humming its particular pitch. Of course you are a symphony. Whose tune do you think the planets are singing as they dance? Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in once more and breathe out the names of your beloveds. Breathe in, breathe out as we are silent together for a time. Beloved, in this time, your gifts are needed more than ever. So please give generously in our offering. Our first reading is by Marilyn Nelson. My face, as foreign to me as a mask, allows people to believe they know me. 13-year-old American Negro girl, the headlines would read if I was newsworthy. But that's just the top of the iceberg, me. I could spend hours searching the mirror for clues to my truer identity if someone didn't pound the bathroom door. You can't see what the mirror doesn't show. For instance, that after I close my book and turn off my lamp, I say to the dark, give me a message I can give the world. Afraid there's a poet behind my face, I beg until I've cried myself to sleep. Our second reading, In a Time of Peace by Ilya Kaminsky. Inhabitant of Earth for 40-something years, I once found myself in a peaceful country. I watched neighbors open their phones to watch a cop demanding a man's driver's license. When the man reaches for his wallet, the cop shoots into the car window, shoots. It is a peaceful country. We pocket our phones and go to the dentist, to pick up the kids from school, to buy shampoo and basil. Our country is a country in which a boy shot by police lies on the pavement for hours. We see in his open mouth the nakedness of the whole nation. We watch others watch. The body of a boy lies on the pavement exactly like the body of a boy. It is a peaceful country. And it clips our citizens' bodies effortlessly, the way the president's wife trims her toenails. All of us still have to do the hard work of dentist appointments, of remembering to make a summer salad, basil, tomatoes. It is a joy, tomatoes, and a little salt. This is a time of peace. I do not hear gunshots, but I watch birds splash over the backyard of the suburbs. How bright is the sky as the avenue spins on its axis? How bright is the sky? Forgive me, how bright.
You may be rich, you may be poor, you may be young, you may be old. But when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. You got to move. You got to move. You gotta move, child. You gotta move. 'Cause when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. You gotta move. You may be black. You may be white. You may be wrong. You may be right. But when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. You may be high, you may be low, you may be down, no place to go. But when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. You gotta move. You may be gay, you may be straight, you may be carrying a heavy weight. But when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. You gotta move. You got to move. You gotta move. You gotta move, child. You gotta move. 'Cause when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move. 'Cause when the Lord gets ready, you gotta move.
First, a story about the young adult novel Speak by Laurie Halls Anderson. It is a strong story, incredibly relevant to this moment that we're in. The main character is a young woman who is assaulted the summer before her 9th grade year. She loses all her friends and slowly retreats inside herself. She forms a thick shell of defenses, fortified by her near total silence. She barely speaks more than 4 lines of dialogue before the end of the book. Her story is screaming to get out of her, and she constantly bites her lips, trying to keep it in. When she finally tells the story of her assault to one person who believes her, everything changes. She tells her story, and the effect ripples throughout the whole school. This story is powerful precisely because of the silence she embodies throughout most of the novel. When she finally does share her story, one person pays attention, listens, hears. And that telling of the story, accompanied by the hearing, marks the beginning of her healing. Now, in this story, it may be easy to imagine yourself as the friend that lends your listening ear and believes her. We often want to write ourselves into the story as one of the good characters. But how do we handle these stories in real life? We live in a city of joy and sorrow, city of promise and pain, surrounded by fellow citizens suffering abuse, oppression, and mistreatment. Some of that suffering is individual and personalized. Some is systemic, and some is nationwide. How do you respond when you hear about the lived experiences of your neighbors who experience this abuse and oppression? How do you hold such a grand scale of pain in your own body, mind, and spirit? How do you change your understanding of fairness when you find out life's not fair, or when the so-called criminal justice system isn't just? How do you incorporate new stories into your broader understanding of American life? If you follow the multicolored intertwining threads and complex overlapping fabrics, you will find the quilt of our shared collective stories. Sometimes hearing them can be painful, and sometimes the stories we hear are in direct contradiction with other stories we have heard. It takes a great deal of thoughtfulness and care to parse out the differences and to weigh the merit of conflicting accounts. And it might feel easier just to tune them out. But poet Ilya Kaminsky challenges us to think about what happens when the citizens of a country no longer hear one another. He is hard of hearing himself, and he has made the bold claim, "The deaf do not believe in silence. Silence is the invention of the hearing." He highlights the need to stay attuned and listen deeply to the pain of the world around you, despite the desire to focus on peace. In his poem, he repeats the phrase, "It is a peaceful country," while simultaneously interspersing moments that challenge that peace and that perception of peace. Of course, there are wishes for peace, but we cannot turn a deaf ear to the moments of war and of violence, of Black men dying in the street. He contrasts the killings of Michael Brown and Philando Castile with the making of a perfect, joy-filled tomato basil salad. He denies hearing gunshots and focuses instead on the birds that he's watching splash in the backyards of the suburbs. He longs for a few moments where it doesn't feel like he's in the middle of a war and that people are dying all around him. I could imagine a moment where he chooses to turn down his hearing aids and sink into a moment of bliss, a month of bliss, even a year. How long can he avoid the painful reality? Can you relate? I know I can. To dream about a pre-pandemic life where social engagements aren't taken for granted. To close your eyes and imagine a world where the poor aren't dismissed as less worthy. A world where those on the margins are called into the center. I understand the desire to tune out for a bit. In fact, I just got back from a retreat where I got to commune with nature. I actually watched birds splashing, not over the backyards of the suburbs, but in the fields of rural Wisconsin. And while I was gone, pain and suffering went on, and I wasn't paying close attention to them. But that's okay. We all need occasional breaks, and we're in this together. I know that while I was gone, some of you were holding on to the reins. And now that I'm back, I can join the team again, continuing the work so that others of you can get some rest and rejuvenation. It is a marathon, not a sprint. We must work together. We also need a few tools to do this work. A thirst for continuing education, humility, and prayer. Now, before you get worked up, let me offer you a new perspective on an old practice. Many people have been taught many different forms of prayer, but I want to highlight two life-giving aspects to prayer. First, it is an opportunity to remind ourselves that we are not the center of the universe, and that there is something greater than us. Whether you call that something God, beloved community, source of life and love, justice, or mystery. Secondly, the act of thinking through what your heart or spirit needs and then naming it out loud is a powerful act on its own. There doesn't have to be a next step. There doesn't need to be a response. The actual act of expressing your need is affirming. It's like the main character of that young adult novel, finally speaking, instead of agonizing in her silence. There is no need for silence like that. Expressing our needs might actually empower us to ask a friend for help, which is the first step toward a deeper relationship. And making that ask requires the recognition that one actually needs help. It requires humility. Humility involves admitting you don't have all the answers, that you can't do it alone. There is something truly profound that happens within ourselves, within us, when we admit that we aren't self-contained and self-sustained units. We are part of a grander fabric that involves so many interwoven strands, and we need one another. This complex understanding of prayer is the one that I consider valuable, and I am pursuing a continuing education in it. How do we express our needs and hopes and dreams that live beneath the surface? My face, as foreign to me as a mask, allows people to believe they know me. 13-year-old American Negro girl, headlines would read if I was newsworthy. But that's just the top of the iceberg me. I could spend hours searching the mirror for clues to my truer identity, if someone didn't pound the bathroom door. You can't see what the mirror doesn't show. For instance, that after I close my book and turn off my lamp, I say to the dark, give me a message I can give the world. Afraid there's a poet behind my face, I beg until I've cried myself to sleep. These words from Marilyn Nelson. In a discussion of her poem, she essentially boils down her message to what she calls her 13-year-old prayer. Let me be a poet, give me something to share. This was the prayer behind her face, the part of her that the mirror doesn't show, the secret she spoke to the dark. What is that for you? What makes up the part of your iceberg that is submerged below water? We all have this hidden part of ourselves that we only expose when we feel safe and when we trust the listener. And I think that this below the surface iceberg part is primarily stories, our mythology. And sometimes, as we have heard in the previous chalice lighting, we need to re-author some of those stories, maybe changing the framework from victim to survivor. And when we tell those stories, we are exposing more of the iceberg. We are leaning in toward a deeper connection, like trees whose underground roots in reality form an interconnected system of mutual support. Okay, one more story for the folks who see the effects of racism in our society and want to pin them on a few bad apples, or only on individual incidents of racism and who fail to see the systemic interplay at work. In her book, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo warns her white readers about this exact misunderstanding and how dangerous it could be. For example, in the case of George Floyd, I could potentially rest assured that if there's a good, bad binary, I'm on the good side, and the 4 officers are on the bad side. Hence, they are the problem, and I don't have any need to grow or change. Additionally, if I only look at those individual acts, I will forget that there are many interlocking systems in place that give privilege and access to some and negatively affect others. I will potentially make things unnecessarily flat and two-dimensional. I might even paint the story of George Floyd's death in broad enough strokes to make 4 villains and a city full of heroes, since so many of us protested his death. We have many reasons to want to valorize ourselves and ensure that we are on the good side of the good-bad binary. But what if it's not that simple? I actually know one of the officers. I worked with him at a previous job. I care about him and consider him a friend. Even if I had wanted to, I never had the privilege or possibility to demonize him. I know Tom, and I know his wife. I've had many conversations with Tom, including heated disagreements about the way police handled the deaths of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile. We do not agree, yet I have never doubted his inherent worth and dignity. And this is where I'll ask you to join me in the complexity of overlapping narratives and conflicting stories. I have a deep desire to understand Tom's story, but without giving it more merit or weight than George's story, or the story of police brutality in this country. I also don't want to feed into the mistake of individualism, where an individual holds the guilt and weight of a broken system. But I'm especially aware that I need to be able to hear and digest stories of the oppressed and stories of the oppressor, because we all have these stories inside ourselves too. Neither Tom nor I are the main characters of George Floyd's story, but we are still the main characters in our own stories. And our stories involve learning about and responding to other people's stories, which in turn shape us and shape our future stories. We get to name and claim the moment that a story of oppression really hits us and changes us. This is the radical and powerful act of telling our stories. But how do we handle all this brokenness? My retreat leader, Karen Herring, taught me that sometimes when an old analog watch has stopped working, this brokenness cannot necessarily be repaired by returning inner gears to their old alignments. We might require new alignments, new stories, and new systems. Like we heard earlier from Amy's story, we might not be able to light the fire. We might not know the exact prayer or the exact spot in the forest, but just telling the story might suffice. We've spent many weeks exploring this practice of telling our stories. Yes, we are changed by the telling, and yes, we might re-author the story a bit and tell a truer story as we plumb the depths of our experiences. But the telling is not the only good to be accomplished. Listening to and savoring the stories of others is also vital. We will have a chance to do that shortly during our cyber social hour, and Sarah will give more instructions a little later. I hope you'll join us. In his book, My Grandmother's Hands, Resmaa Menakem discusses trauma and the way trauma actually lives in our physical bodies. He offers a helpful framework where he wonders what it would look like to seek out the trauma lodged in your body and to break it down and process it. In other words, metabolize it. Just like how our bodies metabolize the food that builds up in our body and converts that food into energy and fuel. I wonder what it would look like to hear and metabolize the stories of others, especially those vulnerable stories that involve a person's pain. To break them down and learn from them, and then to incorporate the lessons learned into the grand fabric of your own understanding, so that you can walk out of that interaction a changed person with a more complete and complex narrative. Or, as our dear musician Carol Cowett puts it, to catch all the stones that everyone threw, to catch all the sorrow that you could in a day, to take all these stones and to throw them away. And isn't that at the heart of education? As we encounter new information, new narratives, stones of anger and injustice, we change our own narrative. You know that surprised feeling when you wake up and realize that overnight your phone has updated its apps and its software? I've learned recently that this happens in small ways, virtually every night. I propose that we think of ourselves similarly, getting a similar upgrade every night, finding a sufficient amount of memory and RAM to process all the new data. May we give ourselves the room to grow and learn and incorporate our new learning, assuming that we will wake up the next day with new stories metabolized and new connections created, feeling refreshed and updated. May we continue to hear new narratives that will push us toward new ways of being in the world. Stories that might challenge us and bring more complexity to our understanding of the world. I'm sorry to say, but if you came here for answers today, you might leave disappointed and with more questions. But isn't that why most of us are here? We want to hear a new story. We want to hear some familiar stories too, but some of those stories need new endings. And those new endings might require your involvement and your action. I hope you can metabolize any stuck energy or build up in unhelpful narratives inside yourself and use that energy to fuel your activism. For just a moment, let's be silent together. A final reading from Arundhati Roy. Whatever it is, coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past, and refusing to acknowledge the rupture, but the rupture exists. And in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. May it be so and make it so. Amen. Please join me in singing our final hymn, Stonecatcher.
One morning I woke up and I knew what to do. I catch all the stones that everyone threw. I catch all the sorrow that I could in a day. Then I take all the stones and I throw them away. Don't ask why I say we must all be free. Don't ask when, say you can count on me. One morning I woke up and I knew what to do. I catch all the stones that everyone threw. I catch all the anger that I could in a day. Then I take all the stones and I throw them away. Don't ask why I say we must all be free. Don't ask when, say you can count on me. One morning I woke up and I knew what to do. I catch all the stones that everyone threw. I catch all the injustice that I could in a day. Then I take all the stones and I throw them away. Don't ask why I say we must all be free. Don't ask when, say you can count on me. Don't ask why I say we must all be free. Don't ask when, say you can count on me.
Say with me our closing words. May peace dwell within our hearts and understanding in our minds. May courage steel our will and love of truth forever guide us. Friends, thank you for joining us today. If you're not receiving our email news, go to our website and sign up. We'll send updates twice a week about groups and gatherings, updates from the board of directors, and more. Call or write with questions or to ask for help or to offer help. And please today join us for our cyber social hour. As Jack mentioned in his sermon, we'll have a couple of special focus questions around the theme of story. We're going to have the opportunity to speak and to listen. And the questions are these. What is a new story that you've been learning from lately? And what does it feel like to be in that learning? I'll encourage you to take some time now and between now and 11:15 to sit and write. Our postlude today was written about our sanctuary in Matamidi. So if you've been there, I encourage you to imagine yourself sitting in that beautiful space as you ponder these questions. We are sending love here from WBUUC at all of our locations around the Twin Cities. Stay resilient, stay connected, everyone. So be it. See to it. Amen.
The ceiling is high to let your soul rise up to the angels who teach you to fly. And when you're weary of clouds, helps you back down and welcomes you home to this hallowed ground. It's gilded in gold, gilded in rust, for heaven below and heaven above, the heaven of the earth. And the windows are wide, so darkness and light, mystery